Hi there. Amazon just released season 2 of Wheel of Time, or rather, it just finished at the time I'm recording this. So, the agony can begin once again. There will be some book spoilers in this review, but considering how different the show is to the books at this point, that really shouldn't matter to you at all. And if you haven't seen it, I did a 500 million hour review, we can call it that, on the first season too, for context. But I'm going to get right into it. First scene of the show. Pointless. Instead of establishing anything, we just get Ishamael, not exactly a look into his madness, just utterly pointless scene. Why is Fain there? What on earth are they doing with his character in this season? Are they going to make him one of the Forsaken now? That's the stupidest answer I could come up with, which means it's probably true. Moiraine agonizing over the fact she was stilled. We know she was shielded. Oh, and just for clarification, I wrote this as the episodes were coming out, but I'm recording it after having watched all of them. So, wrote them as they came out, then recorded it all in one go, just for context. But yes, Moiraine can't tell the difference between being shielded and stilled, and then Doman appears and complains he was cut from season 1. Skipping over Egwene and Co.'s proper introduction to the tower is the laziest thing imaginable. But I found myself thinking when this scene started, are they just going to skip over Egwene meeting Elayne? Are we going to have them already as friends? Because that would be so lazy. They didn't do that, but I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised. Also, why is Nynaeve a novice? Wasn't it a pretty major point that she went straight to accepted? Nynaeve's character doesn't really work otherwise. But of course, they then had the problem of, oh, they've been there for 6 months, but if we do that, it means we would have to do a flashback to Nynaeve doing, the accepted test, so whoopsie. One positive, they are at least distinguishing between weaves now. See, here's the thing, a lot of people are banking on Wheel of Time being like this big show, because it means they can go every week, or whatever, they can go, oh, new news about Amazon's Wheel of Time, or Wheel of Time Episode 5 Breakdown, and doing 5 videos a week per episode, and, reporting on news and stuff. So people are banking on this show being big and popular, so there's going to be a lot of people out there who aren't willing to accept or acknowledge the problems it has, whether we're looking at it from my perspective as a kind of someone who's read the books, or even if you haven't, purely outside of the books, the show has so many problems. But judging from the ratings on IMDb, which purely by coincidence is owned by Amazon, the same company who make the show, but yeah, where I'm getting is, there's been all these articles saying like, oh, Wheel of Time Season 1 was a bit of a letdown, but Season 2 has improved in every single way. It hasn't. The only improvement I could think of is the one I'm touching on right now, the weaves. Instead of just every weave now being like a light blue colour, now we kind of actually have some distinguishing colours between them. And I understand that trying to show something as unrealistic and fantastical as weaving of magic is hard to do in live action, but I'm still not happy with the way they did it. For one thing, they generally don't show the glow of Saidar, which helps distinguish it from Sidene. But hey, at least they improved that one thing. And notice how I mentioned in live action, because yeah, if you were doing an animated version of Wheel of Time, it would be so much easier to do in terms of getting the aesthetics right with things like magic. But then again, has the show even mentioned Saidar and Sidene? I don't remember them ever really mentioning it, but I can totally see why they would do that. I don't agree with it, but I understand their reasoning. It's nice to see that Perrin has something to do for a change. Kind of. He still lacks agency and is just whinging about Nynaeve and Egwene, and ultimately, if we look at his character in retrospect this season, he really didn't end up doing much more than in the first season. The writers for the show fundamentally don't get his character, which is weird, because I got it when I was, I don't know, 12, 13, 14. I was so stupid I couldn't figure out basic arithmetic. Now I'm 33, and I still can't do basic arithmetic. But I can read the multiplication of stupidity in this show, sadly. Cutting out Rand from The Hunt is also worrying. Again, I understand on a fundamental level what they are trying to do with this reshuffling of events. However, the unfortunate thing is that the hunt for the Horn is a rather crucial part of Rand's early development. And what they wanted to do is, they looked at book 2 and 3 and they went, well, Rand doesn't really do much in book 3, but everyone else doesn't do much in book 2, so let's just combine book 2 and 3. No. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the books are perfect. There are definitely problems in the books early on. Like, the first few books have some characterization issues. They're not huge, but largely I would say they're centered around Matt, who seems to be a bit like the author didn't quite know where he was going with Matt. Again, it's not a huge problem, but it's something they could have improved in the show. But the Hunt of the Horn allows Rand to fixate on something, saving Matt, and attempt to escape his inevitable destiny as the Dragon Reborn. Whilst over the course of the book, it is shown that he, put simply, cannot escape the wheel. Will the show manage the same feats with the dragon? Well, I know now that no, it didn't, but I wrote that line because I was on, like, episode 1. Combining Elias with Hurin is a bold move, one I'm sure makes sense in the writer's eyes. Whilst I can almost see the logic in it, I still object to this timing. And again, Hurin is there because he's constantly pushing Rand into that lordship, leadership position, something that Rand doesn't want, but finds himself settling into. Had they not wasted so much time in the first season, they could have had Elias, had him teach Perrin about being a wolf brother, or at least introduce him. They could have skipped Huron entirely and just had Perrin use these newfound senses of his to track Fain. Again, still not really ideal, but I mean, coulda. On a semi-related note, Perrin absolutely should have known from a mile off that it wasn't a signal fire. His nose should have picked up the scent, and he could have warned the others. Instead, they just put in some stupid Uno teasing, which didn't tell us anything. How is Uno alive, by the way? You remember what happened to Uno, Ingtar, and Loial at the end of the first season? The writers don't. The dialogue should always have a point. It should deliver us information that we need to know, even if we don't know it at the time. That's what we call foreshadowing. That is doubly true in a TV show, where you have a very limited amount of time. Even the books, huge as they are, very rarely have absolutely useless dialogue. Incidentally, Elias's character seems largely unrelated to the book version. Based on this scene at least, he's entirely humorless and stoic. But yeah, just to bring it up once again, go back to Season 1's ending. Loial, and probably Ingtar and Uno, were all stabbed by Padan Fain using the dagger from Shadar Logoth, which, as we will see later in this season, is now a lightsaber, which makes it even more baffling that they survived. So did Nynaeve and Egaene master healing and find them immediately, or did they just not bother to address that and hope that we'd forget about it? I'm banking on that, because really that's a huge plot hole. I would love to see what excuse they would use to try and wriggle out of it. Moiraine's reaction to seeing broken Quendiar is bizarre. Is she just trying to downplay her reaction, or did she genuinely not realise that broken Quendiar is sort of a big deal? Was this for the viewer's benefit, making her stupid? Either way, the whole scene was somewhat baffling to me. Why would Moiraine not tell him that he clearly has two Fades chasing him? A man should know if he has the attention of a dark friend, let alone a single murderer. 2 is brown pants territory, but she's like, yeah, go. Oh, Nynaeve training with a sword. What a miserable experience. You know, one of her defining traits in the books, she's a healer. She likes to heal. She likes to help people. She doesn't really enjoy violence. You know what swords don't do? Heal people. I mean, I guess they heal people of being alive. But again, the writers, and many writers, don't seem to understand how to make a character strong without showing them being literally, physically strong and able to beat people up. They go, how do we make this character strong? Or make them beat someone up. Apparently that is the only sort of strength they can conceive. Never mind the fact there are many characters in Wheel of Time who are physically inept, but still strong, whether it's a strength in the one power or strength of character, of will. But here we have Nynaeve practicing swordplay to show that she's a strong woman. Either way, I'm assuming the warders were just being polite, because the prospect of Nynaeve being able to keep up with 2 warders is laughable. And it either means she, for some reason, is almost a blade master, despite having spent most of her life healing people and spanking Matt when he was being a turd, or the warders are extremely incompetent in the show universe. Actually, that wouldn't surprise me. Reduction of characters to make other characters seem important is really good, isn't it? The only way to make a character seem impressive is to reduce another character. And it's funny, I wrote that so early in this script, but that really kind of summarizes all of season 2. Reduce the male characters so you can elevate the female characters. It's almost like one of the main overarching themes of Wheel of Time is that you need a balance of the sexes. You need men and women working in unison and harmony to achieve greatness. Well, not in the show universe. In the show universe, you have to belittle and emasculate every man you see because they're all stupid and useless, and women are better at everything else, pretty much. Also, why are they acting like Nynaeve has no idea why she wants to be at the tower? She has an extremely clear-cut reason to be there. A, she wants to learn how to heal using the one power, because it is far beyond what she can do with her traditional wisdom's knowledge. That was always her goal in going to the tower. B, she wants to dab on Moiraine. Oh, what the hell is going on with Matt? Sure, you can consider other aspects of Liandrin's character. It might make sense that she's keeping him imprisoned, but within the context of what we know now, it made no sense. Ultimately, we can assume that she was holding him because of Ishamael wanting him to go to farm, but then he just sort of wanders about and then he gets kidnapped and teleported there anyway, so there was no point to imprison him because they could have literally just teleported him to farm and trapped him there until they needed him. But why would the tower be allowing her to keep him? Did no one know? Were they even in the tower? I don't know if they even explained where they were. You can't just keep a man hidden like that without anybody knowing, as Moiraine acknowledged and told the Red Archer to capture him. So they just... What? Why is everything to do with Matt's storyline so depressing and dark? If there's one character who couldn't have been changed more from his book counterpart, it's Matt. At this point, they might as well just cut him from the show entirely and give his stuff to Perrin. That would make more sense than what they're doing right now. Considering how stupid that is, that gives you an idea of how much sense it makes. Perrin and Matt are 2 characters the writers just can't seem to wrap their heads around. Somehow Matt is suffering in particular from this, which is really weird because they are not all that complex as characters. And in a way, they are quite similar. I mean, all 3 of the boys are. They are drawn to fates that they don't want. Matt is always trying to escape it, whereas Perrin and Rand more begrudgingly acknowledge and accept what they have to do. I find it odd that Verin assumes Moiraine has been stilled, but still refers to her as Moiraine Sedai. To some extent, Verin is not the typical Aes Sedai, so she might just be being polite. But it's also a pretty big point in the books that whenever an Aes Sedai is stilled and then around others, they do not refer to her as Aes Sedai. In fact, they prefer not to acknowledge them at all, and if they do, they kind of treat them like second-class citizens. On top of that, I feel as if the writing for Verin has made her barely resemble her book self. She's definitely one of the most important side characters. Well, not the most, but she's a popular and important one. She stands out a lot for several reasons, and her personality is quite an interesting one. For me, at least, none of that personality comes across in the show. I didn't hate her personality in the show, I just wondered why they made it so different for no discernible reason. She doesn't seem like not an airhead, but she doesn't seem constantly distracted. But in the show, she just kind of seems like a 5D chess galaxy brain Aes Sedai type, and we have enough of those, surely. And I will admit, sometimes in the books, the Udgers are very stereotypical, like, oh, all the brown Ajahs have ink on their nose and are, distracted by books, and all the red Ajahs, blah, blah, blah. That sort of stuff. But again, I feel like that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They behave that way because that's how, their predecessors behaved. And there is a big thing about that with the Tower in the books. They are going in circles, following traditions that are hundreds or thousands of years old, when sometimes they don't really make sense, and there are better ways to do it. Like when Nynaeve discovers how to heal being stilled, and all the yellow Ajah are like, oh, you did it wrong, you're stupid, even though she literally did something they thought was impossible. In fact, going back to Verin, most of the Aes Sedai in this show are not distinct from one another. I can't understand how you can mess something up when 90% of the work is done for you. You just need to adapt something that already exists. Instead, they discard it most of the time and just give us their own versions, which have all been inferior thus far. If you're working with something written by someone else who is far more competent and successful than you are, you shouldn't really try and improve it. That would be like me trying to, I don't know, re-edit The Exorcist. It'd be like me attempting to rewrite Lord of the Rings. It'd be like me attempting to give Daniel Day-Lewis acting lessons or something. Just don't do it. You might argue that's exactly what I'm doing right now, isn't it? I'm trying to critique professional writing from a TV show. What TV shows have I written? Why don't I write my own show? If I'm so cool. Here's the thing though, you don't need to be a professional to critique. I don't need to be a master chef to tell you that the dog waste you put on my plate isn't a good substitute for a steak just because they're both brown and steaming. Incidentally, I absolutely hate that line of Lan's, "That's the first time someone has told me to be quiet." That is, it's not something Lan would say. Someone might observe that about him, but not something he would say in regards to himself. That rather sums up the writing in the show, doesn't it? Characters are facsimiles of themselves, written as if they themselves are the writer's own observations of that character, instead of being characters themselves. That's what happens when you limit and restrict yourself in this way. Bad guys can't be bad anymore. Evil characters can't say and do, evil things because the writers don't want it to feel icky. But, yes, sorry, buddy, I do not buy for a moment that Moiraine could kill a Fade with her bare hands, effectively. Also, even if she did manage to stab it like that, why did it immediately die and go limp? As much as I liked them actually showing one of the Fade's characteristics for once, being able to slip between shadows, even if it's never implicitly shown in the books to that extent, but more of an implication and like a legend, well, they showed that trait and then forgot far more important trait, which is explicitly shown. Myrddraal take a very long time to die. It is said they only die with the rising of the sun, or they finish dying with the rising sun, something like that, I forget. But Moiraine gave this one, a wound, which, to be honest, probably wouldn't even kill a human instantly, if at all, and it just ragdolls immediately. Then she gets hit with a Thakandar blade, so, well, good thing there's Aes Sedai nearby to heal her. It was really nice of that second Fade, by the way, to wait patiently for her to turn around, then specifically aim a slash at her stomach. It could have stabbed her, it could have cut her head open or off entirely. Instead, it was like, I'm going to do this most pathetic attack I can to give you a chance, because I'm feeling charitable. You know what? I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say the second Myrddraal just wanted to watch her slowly bleed out, instead of aiming for a kill shot, which is why I didn't impale her. Lan wielding a Thakandar wrought blade also seems... well, look, two-weapon fighting is just stupid in almost every single situation. But they had to do it because Hollywood thinks two swords are better than one, because they've never actually held a sword or tried to fight with one. I'll give you an idea of how that is. Go and find a 3 or 4 foot long stick that weighs somewhere in the vicinity of 3 to 6 pounds. Now, pick up another one and start wiggling them about and tell me if it's easier to use one or two. And that's just with sticks, not actual swords, where you have a lot more to keep in mind because you don't want to slice your own thighs open or your toes off. Ignoring that, surely Lan knows, well, if not that they are swords quenched in human souls, they are at least pretty evil. Whatever. Lan takes 100 wounds from those blades and seems about as put out as he would being sliced by a toothpick. So I guess in the show, Thakandar blades don't exist and they're just normal swords, which don't hurt you very much. They hurt about as much as like a kitten's claws. The only thing I liked about that scene at all was Tomas using what I can only assume was his warder's blade imbued with a weave of fire by Verin. Going outside of the writing for a moment, that fight scene was miserable. Bad choreography, bad editing. At least I'm assuming the choreography was bad because I couldn't actually see anything because it was so poorly lit. I couldn't see what's happening. You know what it made me think of though? The scene on Weathertop where Aragorn saves Frodo in Fellowship, only without any of the tension, without being able to see anything. Now, no, not that that's an amazing fight scene when you look at it from, like choreography and all that, but for the purpose of what that scene was trying to do, what it wanted you to feel, it managed it very well. Go and watch Weathertop scene, and then watch Lan and Moraine's fight, and just compare the difference. It's also an interesting comparison because I know some book fans are rather disgruntled about the Lord of the Rings movies, with valid complaints. Now, don't get me wrong, some people think, oh, you like Lord of the Rings books and the movies, how can you like the movies when, you complain about Wheel of Time, blah, blah, blah. Here's the thing, though. Lord of the Rings movies, they do change things from the books. Sometimes those changes are very at odds with the spirit of the books, but at the end of the day, I genuinely believe they tried their best with it, and they didn't make changes for the sake of making them, and they didn't intentionally set out to spite the books. Aragorn is Aragorn, after all. The Nazgul rely on fear as their chief weapon. That is stated in the books more than once, I believe, and Aragorn isn't afraid of them. He isn't even afraid of their master. He is cautious, he is wary, but he doesn't give in to fear. So it makes sense to me that this paragon of humanity and all that men strive to be can defeat the Nazgul because he isn't afraid of them. Either way, watch the two scenes and laugh at how badly the one in Wheel of Time is done. Skipping Selene's introduction and just saying that Rand knows her already. Gee, remember what I said about Elayne earlier? I guess they used that logic on Selene instead. What a great decision, but I can already tell from this scene, 5 seconds worth of it, how much stupidity there is to unpack here. Selene, we'll call her that for now, her main goal, getting Rand. The emphasis here is on getting, and in the show she already has him, which completely invalidates a huge part of Rand's character and the dynamic with her. In the books, Rand was enamored, enraptured, almost obsessed with her, but he never gave in to her charms. Whether consciously or unconsciously, he always kept himself from making that final step, that important last step. Incidentally, this isn't a knock at the actor by any means, but more so the casting. Why did they cast a lady who's almost 40 for this? Selene in the books is described as being initially around 25, but then later Rand thinks she's closer to 20. But the actual number isn't that important. It's more so the fact that she is around his age, not 10 years older, not 20 years older, even with the ages bumped up with the show as they are. The important thing here is that Selene is changing her appearance. She is appearing to Rand how she thinks Rand wants to see her. And again, I get it, that would be really hard to do in the show, but I feel like Selene's supposed youth, and the fact she almost certainly intentionally made herself younger once she got an idea of how Rand was in his personality, that was a big factor in how Rand's attitude toward her played out, that protective instinct, you could say. All that said, I didn't really hate Selene in the show. I thought the actor did as good a job as they could with the lines they had, and they did a semi-decent job at it. That said, I do think they somewhat got Lanfear and Greendale mixed up. Either that or Greendale is cut from the show, so Lanfear is just going to be an amalgamation of the two of them, which, to be fair, I think with an adaptation, you can cut out some of the Forsaken and combine their roles to some extent. Now, I'm not saying their personalities are like the same, but in terms of the roles that they fulfill in the overall narrative, I do think you could combine Samael and Demandred, for example. I do think you could combine Semirag and Masana. And to some extent, yes, Lanfear and Graendal, or Graendal and Moghedien, whatever her name is. And I know some people who are fans of the books might think that's a horrible idea, and I'm not saying they should do that. I'm saying if you had to, you could, and it wouldn't ruin things, in my opinion. Anyway, as for Rand setting up shop, so to speak, in Cairhien, seems like a bit of a 180 from the end of the first season. With him being in such a large city, you'd think he would notice the effect he has on people, being Ta'veren. Specifically, he is the strongest Ta'veren in the world, and the strongest for like thousands of years, since Arthur Hawkwing, 1,000 years ago or whenever. The pattern twists fate and chance around him. I think that doesn't matter though in the show, because in the show, Ta'veren is just like some sort of power level thing. I don't even know. They haven't even mentioned Ta'veren in all of season 2, I think. I assume the lessons from Errol are meant to be taking the place of his training with Lan. Fundamentally, I don't hate this idea of Rand working in what we can assume is some sort of asylum. Feels like the sort of thing that might have happened in another turn of the wheel, a flicker, so to speak, during all those visions and premonitions he had. I've had people tell me that's how I should view the whole show, as some sort of another turning of the wheel, a flicker, one where everyone is kind of dumb. Ah, yes, Lan, slouching, very in character. Perrin holding a sword, very in character. Remember all those times he used a sword in the books? Not like his specific weapon of choice ever really played into his character in any important way now, did it? Don't know how I feel about Perrin's Witcher vision or whatever the hell was going on there. Is he seeing things from the wolf dream, or is he so good at smelling that he can basically smell what happened, sniffing out the evil, such as it were? I think I get what they're going for here. It's kind of like a visual storytelling thing. Like, I get that because the way some of those things are conveyed in the books, that's almost too hard to even bother attempting with live action. I don't object to the idea of Liandrin trying to win Nynaeve over, so to speak. In fact, that is one thing that actually somewhat makes sense to a degree. If we look at it as her trying to win Nynaeve over to her side to make her easier to control, only for events to later play out the way they do, once she realizes that Nynaeve is not so easily manipulated. But I feel as if Nynaeve would be a little more resistant to Liandrin. Nynaeve doesn't hate men, after all. Given her relationship with Rand, she would be wary, in particular, of the Red Ajah and Liandrin in particular. That, or is she trying to get Nynaeve to hurry into the test recepted and hope she fails or dies so that she can remove a powerful channeler? Because Nynaeve isn't just a powerful channeler. Nynaeve is one of the most powerful female channelers alive. In fact, in the books, there are only 6 or 7 confirmed female channelers who are stronger than Nynaeve, and they're not that much stronger than her either. And Nynaeve is, at the moment in the show, assuming the show power levels are the same as the book, which they're not, but let's assume they are, Nynaeve is the most powerful woman in the tower by a significant margin. They don't really drive that home that much in season 2, which is very odd because they did it a lot in season 1. But Nynaeve is so powerful with the one power that every Ajah and like so many Aes Sedai would be obsessed with her, trying to help her. But yeah, I was wrong about my assumption that Egaene and Elayne might have already met. But still, introducing Elayne at this point in time, they had to do it at some point, of course, but you know, the introduction of a character is very important. Seeing her in the seat of her power before coming to the tower is, I would argue, important. To say nothing of the whole cut Caemlyn sequence and how important it was. Small thing, though, would Elayne really be allowed all that fancy stuff as a novice? Wouldn't her mother or Elida have told her that she's not going to be treated as royalty, but they let her pack all that stuff? Did they think it would be hilarious if they didn't tell her? Morghese definitely seems like the sort of woman who would enjoy her daughter being made to look like a clown, huh? Also, way to go at making Elayne your typical stuck-up princess type, who apparently has no idea how to deal with the peasant class people. Way to go with the most generic approach you could have, writers. Did they think that would make for good development later? As if Elayne in the books has no development of her own? They just make her rather instantly unlikable, and then without any real development, she just does a 180 like by the end of the show, which was really cool how they introduce her one way and then her personality shifts immediately without any real development. Of course, her introduction in the books is from Rand's perspective, and he is a tad smitten with her. But even if you view her actions there from a more drawn out perspective, she wasn't anything like this. Shiriam Sadai seems like a bit of an idiot in the show, huh? Nynaeve will be fine in the test because she's powerful. That's not how the test works, though. Maybe she's under compulsion at this point because they do seem to have her being compelled later. Whether you're the strongest channeler or the weakest, though, that has very little bearing on the test from which we know of them. It's not about your level of ability with the one power, it's testing your personality and willpower. But even if she is under compulsion right now, that's not a logical thing to say to another Aes Sedai, because they would go, what? The scene with Sho, Verin, and Moiraine is full of that stupid writing we got in the first season, where characters just say things that the writers probably thought sounded badass or cool. The world is still broken. Not really. Verin, considering how smart she is, should know that the world really isn't in that bad of a place compared to the breaking of the world, which wasn't just a fancy term, it was quite a literal one. Seas boiled, mountains collapsed, geography changed, 3,000 years have passed, and things at the time of the book really aren't all that bad. You have a few wars going on in places, but that's nothing new, and it's not really any huge wars. Things only really start going, into turmoil really around like book 4 and 5, after Rand has established himself and the Dragonsworn appear and more wars are popping up and the Forsaken are everywhere. But what sort of healing did she mean in this scene? Conveniently, they don't go into that, as it was just something to sound cool in the moment without any meaning behind it, like 90% of the writing in this show. Once again, I'm really disappointed with how they've written Verin in the show. Go and compare the scene where she confronts, if you can call it that, Moiraine and Siuan about the dragon in the book. I think that's early on in book 2. But compare it with this scene. One is memorable, the other is not. Case in point, it hasn't been that long since I watched that scene. I don't really remember it. Like, I'm reading what I've written out here, and I'm like, I genuinely don't remember this. Was there a scene like this? I guess so. But I have a very strong memory of that scene in the book. I don't buy Rand being the sort of person who would ambush and beat the crap out of a guy because the guy is a bit of an asshole. Again, that whole thing with Selene doesn't need repeating. This is just a turn of the wheel where Rand is dumb and useless. The only possible explanation is that he did all that because he wanted to get a chance to speak to the one that Yan was looking after, which to some extent makes sense. But again, Book Rand wouldn't achieve that goal by just demolishing the dude. Rand is a little smarter than that. He's not a master tactician, but he's not a complete musclehead, and he's shown, as the books proceed, to be quite deft with maneuvering people when he needs to. And he doesn't like doing it. At times he's disgusted with the way he does it, but he will use them when he needs to. Liandrin having a son is, I don't know, honestly. If it's a ploy for sympathy from Nynaeve or if it's real, it's one of those things where we would need to see how it plays out. And, well, we did see how it plays out. And it was stupid. She became a dark friend to save her son. Then Selene, Lanfear, whatever, was like, yeah, what if your son was dead though? And she's like, well, now I guess I'm a super dark friend. Am I the only one who sees a few slight issues with that character motivation? Likewise, with what the hell was going on with Matt and Min. You don't think they're, gonna put those two together in a relationship, do you? My mind immediately jumps to the stupidest possible route and things they could do. I seem to remember reading somewhere that the showrunner decided he doesn't want Rand to have, the three wives thing because that's icky or whatever. So I'm honestly starting to think that Min might be the daughter of was it 12 moons or 9 moons? I've genuinely forgotten, but that one. And Aviendha might be Fail in the show. I really hope that's not what they're going with, because I'm pretty sure they'll maybe stick Elayne with Rand. But I don't like to think about it, to be honest. I hope they don't. Like, if they have to put Rand with someone, not Elayne. Unless you really develop them more, because honestly, in the books, the development between Elayne and Rand was the weakest of his three wives, in my opinion. Still, on the bright side, and I say that because I wrote that, but I wrote that before I realised what happens a bit later. But on the bright side, Min in these scenes marginally resembles Min from the books. Instead of her first scenes in the first season where she was just grumpy and bland, dare I say she almost cracked a joke with Mat. Is that why they stuck them together? Min's viewings always come true, so now we know Mat is going to stab Rand. Question we need to ask is, why? Is it someone pretending to be Rand, or what? I'm looking forward to seeing how that pans out, because I get the feeling the answer's going to be really dumb. And knowing now what did happen, it was pretty dumb indeed. And yeah, so they removed any goodwill I had towards Min by then making her a dark friend. It's a little funny that at this point of this script, we're 2 hours into the season before we got a first glimpse really at something from the books. Now, granted, the scene itself isn't, but the story they're telling is. The story of Moiraine and Lan meeting in the Pond of Destiny. I'm almost surprised they didn't change it, tell some other made up story, as they are so wont to. It's always apparent immediately whenever they use stuff from the books, because the shift in tone and the feel of the language is so different, so readily transparently obvious that it makes it a little jarring to me. That's what we have some of Nynaeve's passage of acceptance. She overhears Elayne telling Egaene not to be jealous little douche. Frankly, I'm surprised they even allowed that, because so far in the show, Egaene has more or less been Miss Perfect, Mary Sue with zero flaws. Because I want you to remember that Egaene in the books is like the most horrible person imaginable, who gaslights her friends, lies to her friends, abuses physically and mentally her friends, doesn't see anything wrong with spying on people's dreams, and is offended when she can't do it. And she also uses the threat of rape against one of her oldest friends, just because that friend almost caught her in a lie. It's pretty weird that a character so despicable of a human being is the showrunner's favourite character. That really gives you something to think about, doesn't it? Moiraine, though, in this scene, makes a lot of assumptions that she reasonably has no way of knowing. How does she know that was Ishamael? I don't understand what they're doing with Lan's bond. Moiraine implies that it is both present and absent. So as far as we're aware, stilling an Aes Sedai would result in the bond being severed. Reasonably that makes sense because the bond is born of the power. However, with certain examples it seems that should, for example, the stilling be somehow reversed, then the bond re-establishes itself in some way, assuming it hasn't been otherwise broken. The mechanics of this are not entirely clear. The show doesn't make any attempt to leave it any less obfuscated. So the question of whether or not they are still bonded is a confusing one, especially then at the very end of the season they have some sort of telepathic makeout session where they fully re-establish the bond, maybe. Even if we as viewers know that Moiraine is not stilled, but shielded with a tied-off weave, unless she really was stilled and Nynaeve's going to heal her. But that didn't happen. Honestly, I would have preferred that happening, even if it should be happening like 5 seasons from now. And Moiraine being able to unchannel for that long would have been extremely unlikely, as the knock-on effects would have been horrendous to consider. But yes, in hindsight, we have confirmation, of course, that she was just shielded with a tied-off weave. During episode two's final battle thing, I found it really funny for some reason that Massima is young and absolutely ripped. Like that's not a complaint, by the way. It just wasn't how I imagined Massima. It's like giving me funny visions of him later on when he's like the prophet and everything, and he's just like half naked, and he's like, ah, you've gone against the dragon, and then he's like falcon punches the person instead of like telling them to go and be beheaded or something. Again, it's not a problem. I just found it really funny that Massimo was like shredded. It's nice to see that Loial's not being a pushover, a loser, like when Fain crumped him. But the battle scene was bland and by the books. They didn't try anything interesting with it. Although it's kind of funny because that's the only time I can really say this show is by the books. Even that's, I'm coining a phrase there, but whatever. Either way, attack with your channelers first, because if you just grab everyone and trap them with air, they can't fight back, and then you can tell them that they need to swear the oaths. I thought the Seanchan were meant to be smart, but yeah. As soon as they showed Rand walking down this corridor, I said to myself, famous people outside, huh? He's gonna meet Logain, isn't he? That's the dumbest thing that could happen, and lo and behold, it happened. Look, here's the thing. I like Logain's actor. Logain's one of my favourite characters in The Wheel of Time. Because I was so curious what like his motivations were and all that stuff about Min's viewings of him. But this meeting is too early. The sense of anticipation of the eventual meeting of Rand and Logain plays a big part of that. Because it happens very late, well, relatively speaking, in the books. If there's one thing I think the show did well, it was establishing Logain as a character early on. I would have been fine giving him a few scenes sprinkled throughout the seasons, because it's hard in a TV show to have a character vanish for like 3 seasons and then come back and be important. I get that. There's other things Logain could be doing, though, at this point, like being in the tower. Why they sent him to Tyrion is frankly baffling. A false dragon wouldn't be let out the tower. Like, they're saying Moiraine let him out, or like arranged for it, but wasn't Moiraine already exiled from the tower at that point, so why would she have any authority there? And wouldn't they entirely just tell her to go, like, jump down a well? It's funny, Shiriam remarked earlier that Nynaeve would be fine because she's powerful, but then here she said, by the way, you can't use the power, so I guess she contradicted herself, huh? You might argue she didn't mean to refer to Nynaeve's potential with the power, but her power of character, but no, she didn't mean that. That would make no sense within the context. She just contradicted herself because the writing is bad, because that is not how you would word it. As for the actual test, they kept the principle the same. They changed the content. I do wonder what was the point of that. Was what we got more effective than what happened in the books? That, I think, is going to boil down to personal tastes. The effect was more or less the same, but are we to believe this is what happened to Nynaeve? That she had a tragic backstory like everyone else? From what we know in the books, her parents are very rarely brought up. Her mother died when she was very young, then her father raised her by himself. He died when she was a teenager. It's never implied they died to violence, as that would rather change her backstory. Again, it's possible this isn't what actually happened. Nynaeve is seeing but a possibility. But I think the implication is that's actually what happened and she's reliving it. I don't really like that because, again, not everyone needs a damn tragic backstory. Why would bandits be in the Two Rivers, of all places? For the second vision, much the same. Whilst different to the books, it makes sense at least. This one I feel like might have been included. This one I understand. The first one was like, what? This one I think they did just so Tam could show up. Remember what I said earlier about characters vanishing for seasons? Well, Tam isn't just gone after the first book, but he has nothing to do at this point. So it might be a way for the actor to show up for the sake of contracts or whatever. I don't know entirely how that works, but Tam does show up quite a lot in the books, but mostly later on. Him making appearance here doesn't seem like happenstance to me. I know that actors are generally contracted to show up in X amount of episodes or something though, so I don't mind it. The fear is one that makes sense for Nynaeve. That's the important part. The main issue, there isn't really a huge sense of urgency in this vision. Nynaeve can just bounce compared to the first one. The choice doesn't really seem hard. With the third test, I think it's a little unfair of Shiriam to blame all this on Liandrin. Not that I like Liandrin, but real talk. All Aes Sedai need to do it, and if Nynaeve failed, that is on her. Sure, the test is pretty stupid in a lot of ways when you think about it, but specifically, Liandrin's not to blame. It is pretty hilarious to me that they gave or kept the Seanchan having Southern American accents to some extent. That Seanchan drawl, as they say. Generally surprised they did it. Then again, if they are going to really play up the Seanchan being evil, I suppose evil Southern slavers makes sense and is an angle they can roll with. As the media seems to hate the South quite a lot lately, I assume part of that is most Hollywood writers have seen nothing of the United States beyond LA. Honestly, they've probably seen less of America than I have. But yeah, no, that's not a complaint though, by the way, about the accents. Unlike them killing my man Uno, that's just mean to kill someone who survives the last battle. What's more, killing the absolute legend that is Uno right now. We'll never get that great scene where he accompanies Nynaeve. She tries to handle his non-stop swearing. I hate that Perrin vows here too. Would he have in the books, had he found himself in this scenario? Maybe. I still hate it though. Remember what I said an hour ago about how the show just brings down men, especially the main three, Mat, Perrin, and Rand. They are just constantly humiliated and emasculated, and it's fine for them to go through suffering and stuff because, that happens in the books. But you have to give them their hero moments too. But they don't do that in the show. So it's like, why are we rooting for them? They're not heroes if they don't have heroic moments or qualities. That's kind of the point. If Peter Parker remained Peter Parker for his whole life, he wouldn't be a superhero. It's because becoming Spider-Man gives him that outlet, his new persona. He is still Peter Parker, but the mask gives him the confidence. It's not really even about his powers at the end of the day. It's about awakening to his heroic potential. And that's a children's comic book, which is more advanced than this show, which is meant to be sexy, mature, gritty, violent for adults. Just as a reminder, Perrin and Nynaeve are my two favourite characters in the books, so I feel any butchering of them more keenly than anyone else. It explains why Rand is in Cairhien, sure. Maybe even Selene helped guide him because she knows that he needs a teacher, but Logain remarks that men who can channel have an aura or a glow or whatever. That's not really true. See, here's the thing. Women can instinctively sense it in others at a certain point. They can look at another woman and they know if she can channel, how much she can channel, things like that. Men need to be tested. There is no glow for Sidene. If two men are channeling, they can feel how much the other is holding or using, but they don't glow like Super Saiyans. That is specifically a female Sidar related thing. Like, to put it another way, if you adapted Wheel of Time in the most logical way, which would be as an animation, not necessarily an anime, like a Japanese anime, but I think that would work pretty well because they usually have the sort of bombastic style of animation that works for this sort of high intensity magic stuff. But imagine for a moment that Wheel of Time is an anime. If women are channeling, they would get glows kind of like how it works in Dragon Ball Z, probably. Like whether it's yellow, gold, whatever. Whereas for men, the best way to do it would probably be just a sort of distortion in the air around them. Almost like heat waves, but made to look more ominous. But yeah, they could have just said Logain's able to sense other channelers, even though Rand can't because he hasn't learned the trick to it yet. But yeah. Instead of just forgetting the simple fact that Sidene doesn't glow, Sidar does. Hell, you could have even said that Rand was channeling when he saw Logain without realising it, because he instinctively knew the man was a false dragon, and Logain could feel the sheer power and menace there. Granted, he's been stilled, so you're kind of screwed either way thanks to poor writing decisions taken in Season 1. Speaking of which, if you are stilled, gentled, cut off, whatever, can you still sense the power in others? I didn't think that you could, but I'm not entirely sure about that. Selene remarks in this scene that the Queen has promised a reward for the horn. The Queen of Cairhien. Well, that's interesting. What happened to King Galdrian? You wouldn't change it from a king to a queen unless you're planning something. So what is it they're planning here? I worry, frankly, anytime a change like this comes up. Because let's be honest, how many changes have been good in the show? Probably 1% of them. And, well, I mean, again, talking in hindsight, we know it was really, it seems like they did all of that just to set up the stuff with Moiraine's sister and nephew, which led nowhere. The Glee Man, though, in this scene looked a lot more like a Glee Man than Tom did, which was funny. Speaking of Kings and Cairhien and Tom, yeah. Anyway, I know I already spoke about Selene and where I get why some changes might have been too hard for a TV show, but couldn't they have at least given her white to wear? The thing about Selene, she always likes to wear white and silver, which is another reason why I mentioned earlier that they kind of got Lanfear mixed up with Greendale or someone else, because in the show, she's almost always wearing black. But yeah, it's like one of the main defining traits of her outfit is that she kind of always wears white with silver. Did anyone ever call Nynaeve Nye in the books? Not like a problem. That's just an observation because I really can't remember if they ever did that. Seeing Rand wearing the sort of coats and jackets that he might be expected to later is, oh, it's nice for a change. It makes a difference from the first season where I know they're farmers, but everyone just wore dirty rags. I hate that aesthetic. Peasants didn't just go around wearing like dirty strips of cloth that they found on the floor. Water, generally speaking, is somewhat free. People knew how to clean their clothes, and just because they were poor didn't mean they were filthy. Anyway, when Rand walks away from Selene, that would have been a really good chance for her to show a bit of her true colours. They try to show that a bit later, when she was like, oh, if you do that again, I'll stab you in the ass. While some of the basic ideas involving her introducing Rand to Cairhien in the Game of Houses, I almost said the Game of Thrones there. Did you hear? I was like, the Game of Houses. They fumbled too much of it. They didn't really convey properly how the Game of Houses works. But yeah, Perrin is now what? Someone to be rescued? His character arc has so far been disappointing in the show. I don't understand why they're struggling so much with him. And if Ishamael has his hands on Perrin, quite literally, that somewhat makes no sense. The hunt for Perrin and Rand is an important one, and if the Forsaken just had Perrin at his mercy, you get where I'm going? Why does he care that Perrin is a wolf brother anyway? Would Ishamael even know what that is? There was a book about them in the Age of Legends, if I recall, but I don't think they were common. There's what? 3 of them that we know of, and they all cross paths at some point, which would imply that they're all drawn to each other, and further implies that they are incredibly rare, because if there were more of them, they probably would have shown up, being drawn to Perrin at some point in the books. The more wolf you are, the more you're mine. But why? Wolves are not dark friends, they're not servants of the shadow. They are, in fact, quite the opposite. More so than any other animal we know in the entire setting, the wolves of Wheel of Time are directly opposed to the Dark One. And also, I know I mentioned it last time, but these wolves are so tiny. They're like little baby dogs. The moment Egaene was shown weaving in front of the testing ter'angreal, I said out loud, no, Egaene, no. Because I knew something stupid was about to happen. For starters, is that room just unlocked? Seems pretty cool that any novice can just stumble in there by themselves. It's not like ter'angreal are dangerous, which it's not like they said that in this very episode either. Elayne remarking, whatever she saw might have offered her a better turn of the wheel, did make me laugh though. Maybe Nynaeve saw the books in there, and she decided to stay in a more logical, reasonable, and better universe. I know I would if I was in the miserable show version, but Nynaeve's vision is a lot like some of those alternate turns Rand was seeing. You'd think she would have known it was no good and a fake though, because there's no way Lan would forsake his battle. Nynaeve knows that. In the books, She has a similar-ish vision, which I think is implied to happen after the last battle. It's been a while though, so I forget. The whole dream would have been wrong from the get-go either way, for that if no other reason. Something she hates about Lan, but no doubt respects and understands too. This raises the question though, if the archers can just take a while, has that never happened before? Do they wait like 10 minutes and then go, oh nah, she died? Well, we're only 3 episodes down, but we're halfway through the script because, as is usually the case, I've found most of my complaints, shall we say, are at the beginning and the end, and the middle just is kind of like a drag of bland nothingness and filler. We kick episode 4 off with Ishamael breaking the seal on what is most certainly Lanfear, considering how at one point he said Lanfear in his chants. This, well, do I need to say it? Having Ishamael be the one who breaks the seal of the other chosen Forsaken seems like a pretty big and nonsensical change to me. From what I understand of the books, the various Forsaken were sealed at the same time as the boar. The closer they were to the sealing, the deeper they were sealed. Ishamael was a special case. He's the Dark One's pet, to such an extent that he was never truly sealed, and he was now and then free to haunt the world, but not consistently. He was let out, you might say, to spread chaos. Agienor, meanwhile, was sealed closest to the surface, so he felt the effects of time more, and was freed earlier. But the implication was never that Ishamael was popping the others out, because that wouldn't really be in his or any of the Forsaken's schedules. The whole point is they don't really work together. Sure, sometimes they might play at it, but they are always scheming to be the last one left, to backstab the others. Lanfear in particular is so proud that her being freed by Ishamael, as explicitly as we have right here, kinda changes their dynamic and power balance to me, in a way that doesn't initially make sense, if you compare later examples in the books. Did you catch that scene where Egaene tried to touch Nynaeve's ring and they played the same clip twice? Great editing from a $1 TV show. Did you catch that scene where Egaene tried to touch Nynaeve's ring and they played the same clip twice? Great editing from a $1 TV show. Your bond wasn't ripped from you, she took it. How did Moiraine manage that? Bonds are weaves, they are made and manipulated with the one power, which Moiraine, at that point, can't use. So how did she take the bond? She didn't do that in Season 1 at the end, because that would have been a bigger deal, she just masked it. Perrin asked Elias why he didn't pop up in Season 1, and Elias panics, because he knows the writers screwed him, so he just remarks that he doesn't want to go near Aes Sedai. At least that makes more sense than his refusing to warn everyone of the Seanchan attack, because yes, as it happens, if you knew an attack was coming, you could set up like an ambush, and they might have been able to turn the tides. Or they could have all evacuated the town and set a fire trap, but Elias is just like, meh, whatever, I only cared about you, Perrin. Which I suppose is okay. Sure, why not? Hopper is finally introduced. Way too late. All this could have happened in Season 1. Should have, could have, didn't. If they hadn't wasted an entire episode on that filler arc with the warders, they could have done it. The series needs 10 episodes per season, not 8 as well. The issue with Ishamael, which I've typoed here as Ishamael, the issue with Ishamael effortlessly being able to teleport around and find the main characters with no issues, despite that being rather a big plot point in Eye of the World, is that he could just teleport over to them, dunk on the ones he doesn't need, because at the end of the day he only needs Rand, and he could take him. All of these machinations make little sense for him, in my opinion. Selene is absolutely looking at Rand's weave in this scene, isn't she? Do you think he's just making fire zoom around himself before he shoots it at the Fade? Is that the logic they would use here? Because yes, if a male channeler makes a fireball, anyone can see it once it exists. They won't see the weaves creating the fireball, but they can see the results. In general, though, I feel like the difference between Saidar and Selene is something the show is really struggling with and doesn't want to talk about, which is odd, as it's not all that complicated. Her reaction is kind of funny, too. As you no doubt remember, Selene in the books was constantly trying to get Rand to channel, and yet almost every single time he refused. Now he's just casually channeling and she's like freaked out, which would only feed into his mistrust of the power, surely? At this stage in his development, Rand should be attempting to avoid channeling at all costs, thinking that if he doesn't channel again, everything will be fine. Selene should be pushing him to embrace that power. Unless she is using compulsion on him, just hate everything they're doing here. The whole point is that you resist the seduction of the dark, not give in to them, which the show doesn't seem to understand, which is why a lot of our heroes are effectively dark friends, which means like the whole point of Wheel of Time is that the Dark One has no power if you deny him, right? All of the evil in Wheel of Time is pretty much born from men. Trollocs and Fades and all these things. They don't just pop up from the Dark One's sphincter. They were made by men. But Rand is definitely looking at her weaves before Moiraine Dark Souls her, even when the results aren't visible. And yes, a man can sense when a woman channels because he gets goosebumps, but he straight up is looking at the weaves. Moiraine thinks Lanfear can't be killed by her. What? Here's the thing. Yes, Moiraine in theory doesn't know that the Forsaken are just ancient Aes Sedai. They aren't gods, they aren't demigods. They call themselves the Chosen, but really, they're people. If you decapitate them, they are gone. Sure, the Dark One can bring them back to life, he can grab their soul and shove it in a different body, but their actual bodies are, well, perfectly normal. For an Aes Sedai, they age really slowly, but if a child hit a Forsaken with a rock, they could die. They might struggle to do that, obviously, but, it could happen. Being impaled and then having your throat slit would kill any Forsaken who didn't have someone there to immediately heal them. Only golems can survive that level of punishment. Maybe a Fade. I'm just going to assume Moiraine doesn't know that, and she thinks they are effectively demigods. Which is not helpful because she is the voice of the show. She is supposed to inform the viewer of things they need to know, like world building and exposition. It isn't helpful if she keeps giving us false information, but I suppose in this adaptation, the Forsaken, for some reason, are immortal, apart from when they're not. What? It sucks, though, because this turns them into monsters in an unnatural sense. Forsaken are monsters because they are just men and women who are cruel as men and women can be. Their atrocities in the War of Power, or whatever it was called, they could have been done without the power, feeding a city's population to Trollocs and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, there isn't really anything that special about them outside of their ability to channel, which is fairly normal in the series. So I think that's stupid. It's stupid that Lanfear is using the true power here, because using the true power doesn't work that way. And if it works that way in the show, then you've written yourself into a corner immediately, because later on, someone else gets killed and they actually die, even though there's no reason for it. Using the true power doesn't work that way. It doesn't just let you go, hey, I'm immortal now, screw you. Oh, well, it shouldn't work that way. Apparently it works that way in the show, and that's going to give them problems immediately, as we will talk about a bit later when we get to the final episode. They really aren't making it subtle that Suroth is a dark friend in this adaptation, are they? To some extent, I can almost appreciate that, as whilst it didn't bother me, the constant wondering about who could be a dark friend when it could be almost anyone with how subtle some of them are, I could see that detracting from enjoyment, possibly. The most comparable thing being is when you have shapeshifters in a show, which means at any time they can go, I was Bob all along, not Fred. The dark friends, at least, always tend to have some gives in the book. Maybe in the show, she's not a dark friend and just being manipulated. But no, they pretty much immediately did away with that. So Yeah, I don't really know how I feel about Padan Fain here either. Yes, he worked with the Dark Friends. Yes, he had the Horn of Valir, but I just don't know what they're doing with his plotline, and I'm concerned. Also, isn't it kinda stupid for Ishamael to give him the Horn of Valir? That wound will barely slow her down. But why? How do you know that, Moiraine? Considering how you know nothing about anything and half of what you know is wrong, how on earth do you know about the true power which for some reason now makes you unkillable? And if she knew that, shouldn't she know that Lanfear can travel with a capital T? Instant teleportation? And if she had been with Rand for such a long amount of time, you're going to tell me that one of the smartest Forsaken didn't put on him a way to keep track of his location. Can't give her a way to follow us. So you think she's able to effectively tank any amount of damage, like fatal wounds, but following someone who is on a horse is beyond her. What? Rand's face is how I feel. I can see what they are trying to do here with Aviendha taking the place of Gaul, but I'm not sure how I feel about Rand's love interests all being introduced with other characters first, because it's going to fundamentally adjust a lot of the development in how they naturally progress. It doesn't really matter though, does it? Because, they're not going to be really any connection to Rand, so meh. Also, did Lanfear ride a horse to Tar Valon in the same night? Like, I really don't understand what happened in that scene because the editing in this show is so bad. Because if she went from Cairhien to Tar Valon, that's like 400 miles. Horses can't go 400 miles in a night. For starters, people don't really use horses at all at night. But I guess in the show version of the world of Randland, everything is as far away from everything else as it needs to be for that particular scene. Don't worry about it. I bet they can't wait until travelling really comes into play, because then at least they don't need to worry. Not that they are about, travel times and distances. Everyone can just pop up at any point in time perfectly then, and they can go, whew, what a relief. On the one hand, Liandrin and Suroth having typical dark friend style infighting and squabbling makes sense. But would Liandrin really just let Nynaeve loose like that? It also robs Nynaeve of some of her agency. And I know I mentioned how all the men in this show, all the male characters, are humiliated and emasculated and made useless, robbed of things they did in the books for no reason. They do that to Nynaeve as well, and I don't understand why, because in the first season, they were really bigging Nynaeve up. Like, and again, Nynaeve's one of my favorite characters, but I did find it a bit weird what they were doing. Like, they weren't treating her the balanced way she's portrayed in the books. She's just useless this season. It's like they didn't know what to do with her. I don't like her being allowed to escape. Because you know what happens in the books? Liandrin or whatever brings them all out. Nynaeve, makes an explosion of power and escapes along with Elayne. But now she's just allowed to escape. It's a slight change, but an important one, in my opinion. Same way giving Gaul's lines to Aviendha might not seem like much, but Gaul isn't a maiden of the spear. Nynaeve doesn't even do anything here, which makes her look like the coward she believes she is later in the series. But as we readers know, she is not a coward. Then she's kidnapped by a warder on top of that. Man, I'm not sure why Farm looks like Africa or something. I thought it was supposed to be more like Cornwall, given its location and the whole Almouth Falmouth thing. But it's not a big deal. I just thought it was a weird decision, and it's slightly going to mix things up later because the IE will come from the waste, which is kind of closer to a desert than Toman Head is supposed to be. But bleh. Did you like when Loial just watched Egaene being collared and didn't even have any sort of reaction? Now, I get that, yes, he's probably trying to not gape at her and make everyone wonder why he's staring, but the fact there was no indication there whatsoever is just, again, bad filmmaking, bad editing. You have at least one insert shot of Loial sort of looking conflicted, that he wants to save his friend. Instead, he's just kind of there in the background like an extra. I guess he forgot about her, or didn't care very much. Also, if they use collars and leashes, why are like most of them walking around with tennis balls in their mouths? It's like they went for one thing and then the other, and it's so stupid. Comically enough, though, that scene of Egaene learning about her Adam is probably the most accurate scene in the whole show so far. Then we have a scene that almost makes sense. Moiraine having the idea that Loial could, in theory, teach Rand. It's a pretty good idea, but they seem to be forgetting that Moiraine was exiled from the Tower in Season 1. And an exiled Aes Sedai being able to casually move a false dragon, well, I mean, I already mentioned it, but it's stupid. How did she do that? It's the start of a good idea, but then they realised that they screwed themselves over in Season 1 and they didn't bother to worry about it, really. They just marched on. They're playing it pretty fast and loose with Telayan Riyadh, aren't they? I bet it's this scriptwriter's dream, though, as they are taking it as an excuse to basically say and do anything they want. This stuff with Min and Mat and Rand is dumb. Min's foretellings always come true. That's just how it is. The nearest we had to ifs and such is her telling Siuan to stay close to Gareth Bryn, but her telling Mat to stay or go wouldn't make any difference. She would know that. We know that Mat isn't going to kill Rand unless the show just decides to end at that point, and that's ignoring the fact that they made Min a dark friend. Just gonna move on from that. The stuff with Moiraine too, whilst it's not as bad as Season 1 spending an entire episode wasted on some random dude, at least in theory they're trying to give us more about Moiraine. But the truth is, this is only happening because the actor needed more screen time. Whether that's because she's the biggest name in it, or because she's an executive producer, I don't know. But it makes me rather worried about what's going to happen later. I mean, that's assuming the show gets, that far, which, like Save Us, it will not. Moiraine isn't even in half of the Wheel of Time. She's in 5 books, 6 books maybe, and there's a 14-book series. How's that going to work in the show? I dread to imagine because, I mean, if they write her out, the chances of her coming back at the end are very slim, I would say. So they're either going to keep her there the whole time. No, again, move on before I get a headache. Are we supposed to take it that Liandrin is using the ways to teleport around? Or did Lanfear teach her how to travel? Because in this episode she appears in both Cairhien and Tar Valon in what looks like one night and the next day. So if Katara saw Rand's birth, why didn't she mention that it was a boy? Did she think that was just obvious? Well, we know why, of course, because, the stupid Season 1 mystery box that will haunt all writers until the end of time as a measure of stupidity they hope never to be compared to. Also, the scene really doubles down on Moiraine and Siuan being super lovers, which I don't see being a good idea. It is really gonna screw up potential developments for 4 characters at least. Anyway, why was Katara by the way, don't tell anyone? They didn't bother to explain that in this scene. And frankly, so much of this show must be completely nonsensical for people who haven't read the books. Whereas if you have read the books, you are just oh man, I know what they're meant to be doing here, but they've done it in the stupidest way imaginable. Everybody loses. It's like they made a bet, or it's we purposefully trained him wrong as a joke. We purposefully made the show awful as a joke. The reunion between Lan and Rand was lame. The scene in the books where he prepares Rand to face the Aes Sedai in the Amyrlin seat is a memorable one. Shows how Lan is more than just Moraine's bitch puppet. In the show, it largely comes off as him just lecturing Rand about how cool Siuan is and how Rand is a loser who should basically do what everyone tells him to do. There's no hints here as to Lan's meaning, where he's really preparing Rand, or why. I greatly dislike that Rand has more or less accepted being the dragon reborn immediately. That's going to make the whole 3rd book pointless, and the scene at the end of it, which is really memorable, it's a pointless scene now, because they've kind of already done it at the end of this season. The problem is, Rand just, I mean, I know I'm jumping ahead to the end here, but Rand just like stands there looking gormlessly down at a crowd of people. You know, we don't have him going, "Stop! I am Rand al'Thor, the Dragon Reborn." Because that was such a good moment in the books, you know? And it's memorable, you know? I didn't need to go and look up what he said there. I knew it verbatim because it was memorable. The only memorable lines in the show are memorable because they're so stupid. Man, this show really loves having main characters just get knocked out suddenly for dramatic purposes, doesn't it? Shame that'll be awful later on when Mat and Perrin are actively being hunted by just about every Forsaken and Dark Friend around, who have no qualms about killing them. The Forsaken in the show have just shown that they can basically appear anywhere at any time. Mat and Nynaeve and so on are just effortlessly ambushed and squished by people. Remember in season 1 when Nynaeve was God Mode Tracker, who could track Lan without him noticing? I guess that doesn't apply when some random warder is tracking her. Mat just being awkwardly dumped, and I hate it. The books are quite elegant at getting characters where they need to be, often bringing them together at the right time as one another. They're not perfect, but they do a pretty damn good job. You know, that's the whole problem with Game of Thrones, by the way, right now. George R.R. Martin got himself in the Milanese knot, you could say, with all of his characters being spread out across the world, and they all need to be in certain places at certain times, but he doesn't want to, you know, skip like 5 years ahead or whatever, so it's a very hard thing to do. I'm not saying he's a bad writer, I'm saying it's an understandable problem, and when you have those sort of problems and you have a solution already given to you, because Wheel of Time has people where they need to be, why would you ignore that and then run into problems of your own creation and design? Yeah, in the show, people will just appear where they need to be, even if it doesn't make any sense for them to be there. You're the water that turns the wheel. Blah, blah, blah. Hate that line. Yes, Swan likes fishing. She makes fishing-related analogies. But she isn't stupid. She knows the Wheel of Time isn't a water wheel. It's a weaver's wheel. Do the writers know that? Do they know what a weaver's wheel is? When they say, people are spun out into the pattern and stuff, do they not understand that concept? Or did they just think Swan likes fish, so literally everything has to be related to fish and water for her? And then she has to humiliate Rand by shielding, severing him from the source. And I guess she just took a lucky guess that he was embracing it, because, again, women don't know when men are channeling. Kind of a big deal that, Halima, a little character who shows up later on. Could any single person shield Rand? In theory, yes, if he isn't already holding the source. Once you are holding it, it's much harder to cut it off, as opposed to just stopping someone taking it in the first place. And he was clearly already holding it in the shot. Now here's the thing. Rand's strength with the One Power does increase over the course of the books, of course, but I'm pretty sure no single Aes Sedai could ever cut him off when he's already holding it at any point in the books. Keep in mind that near the end of the books, Rand is able to fend off a full circle that is trying to sever him when he's, already embraced the power. That's either 13 channelers or 72. They don't really elaborate on it at the time. He just says it's a full circle, led by a man, if I remember correctly, but the implication there could be that it's 72, because I think that would be a full circle, and Rand being able to stop 72 people in a circle from cutting him off gives you an idea of how freakish that would be. Even being able to stop 13 of, female Aes Sedai would be ridiculous, impossible, most people would assume. So having Swan just casually able to do this is ridiculous. The dynamic of power in this scene is just awful, because it's like the writers are afraid to give Rand any moment where he seems powerful or empowered. And if the person he's empowered against is a female, by the light, no, that is not possible. I'm sure the writers are slathering over the day they get to write the scene of Rand's journey to the White Tower, the one that ends at Dumai's Wells. They're wondering how can they make that journey end with Egaene being the one to save him. Instead of Asha'man kill, we'll have Egaene smash. Is Rand allowed any agency? Is he allowed to do anything he does in the books? Or is this entire show dedicated to tearing him down at every available chance and opportunity? Case in point, we would have been better off if you were a girl. Then cuts to Egwene. Wow, subtle. Once again forgetting the point that if the dragon were a girl, the prophecies would be completely different because there's no taint on the female half of the power. See, they want their cake, but they want to eat it too. See, they're not mentioning Saidar, and they're not mentioning Saidine, but for some reason they want to keep the whole, the taint aspect, but it's like they're trying to make it so just like it's a man thing. If you are a man, you are just tainted or something. Truly, I cannot comprehend the absolute nonsensical BS that is this show's writing. Testing the Damani's power by making them do weaves is a stupid contrivance of television. You don't need that because Aes Sedai have built-in DBZ scouters, and they can just look at each other and know how strong they are. They can look at those Super Saiyan auras on top of that. It's TV, visual medium. Real talk, they could just use the glows as well. This just seems like a stupid, inelegant way of doing it. Oh, so who can do the biggest fart, basically. It's designed to make us see how badass Egwene is. Although I take it to see her getting excited at being able to use her power, which is definitely an Egwene thing to do, because Egwene thinks she's the hottest shit since sliced bread. Probably spends half her time in the books trying to drag down people who are superior to her, be it in looks, talents, strength, knowledge, station, or anything else. I think I just realised why Egwene is the showrunner's favourite character. It's also a stark reminder that the scene where Rand effortlessly manhandles both Egwene and Elayne at the same time, both of whom are extremely powerful, by the way, that will never happen in the show. Absolutely no, no, no. Instead, we'll get a scene where they both bully him and then they individually bully him and they go, man, you're so rubbish, Rand. Why don't you know how to do this amazing stuff? Let us teach you. Can't have Rand seem incompetent or strong or useful, which begs the question, why does he even exist? Why does the Dragon Reborn matter if he's useless and Egwene is 5 times better than he is? Just send Egwene out to solo the Dark One, let her solo all the Forsaken at the same time. The maidens are meant to be super badass warrior ladies, but they still have huge amounts of hair. See, most Father Eyes Mai have short hair. Presumably, it's a twofold reason because they're in the threefold land. And it makes it harder to fight, so they keep it short but for a braid. Like Padawans from Star Wars. Having Bane and Chiad, but not Gaul, fundamentally it ruins all 3 of those characters, especially Gaul, seeing as he doesn't exist. Hate to say it, again, but really, what do the writers of this show have against men? Cut, humiliated, emasculated, incompetent. In fact, one of the only characters who is male and is shown in a positive light, purely by coincidence, is the showrunner's boyfriend. Could that be nepotism? Or is it merely a coincidence? When they brought up the mystical tea of soul perception, I thought, for a moment, they might actually do something interesting, if bizarre, and show us some of Matt's, previous lives, if you want to call them those, directly linking him to the memories he later receives in the books. The implication, to some readers, is that those were his lives, his previous reincarnations, or incarnations, or whatever, whereas others just prefer to think they are completely random memories from random people. Well, not exactly random, as almost all of them are great generals, but you get it. I don't think they ever directly stated in the books if they are Matt's incarnations, but I don't think it would be terrible if they were, even if I don't believe that's the case. At any rate, instead of that, we just got Matt tripping out. It's so sad what they've done with him, especially with his family. That's the worst part about it. His family just being disgusting, miserable, abusive people. Swan's plan doesn't make sense. She's whining that Rand isn't strong because he hasn't learned anything. Her plan is to lock him in the tower where he can't learn anything, then wheel him out at the last battle and just assume that in the time he was locked up, he learned from himself? Or did she want to find Logain and get him to teach Rand? Because she didn't say that? I mean, her plan makes no sense. But why Farm of all places? Yeah, that's a good question, Rand. Why on earth do the Forsaken want everyone gathered up at Farm? Do they have their own chosen prophecy they want to fulfill? I bet it's going to be really stupid. I mean, I know it was stupid, but I didn't know when I wrote that bit. Moiraine remarks that's where the dragon is supposed to proclaim himself. She just didn't mention it before. She doesn't mention Calendor, so if they ever bring that up in the future, Rand should be like, why didn't you tell me that? Thanks, Moiraine. But effectively, they've replaced the Stone of Tyr in Calendor with Farm. Meanwhile, they have, Rand is still shielded. Blur. Going by show logic here, by the way, it took 3 of them to shield Logain, right? 2 or 3 Aes Sedai, and they had to kind of concentrate on that. And Rand is a lot more powerful, so how did they need like 2 or 3 to shield Logain, but 1 is okay for Rand? What's your excuse there, writers? Is it, oh, Rand doesn't have any technique, he doesn't know what he's doing, so bleh. Even if he doesn't have technique, his sheer raw power would be enough to just burst that shield. They also showed that Nynaeve, with no technique and just raw power and intuition, was able to basically bring Lan back to life. So, what's your excuse here, writers? Rand asking a Forsaken for help. Nothing else to say. I might as well have said, Samwise Gamgee slaughters children, or Luke doesn't go to Cloud City, or Stannis bends the knee. And I also think that Lanfear is not the sort who would rampage through a city like that. Maybe if she lost her temper, but in a rational mind, she would probably be aware that a straight arrow or sword or rock could, kill her. I mean, not the show version because she's indestructible now. She might not admit to it, but Lanfear's not stupid in the books. Most of the Forsaken know that even with the Aes Sedai of that age being like children, they don't really want to openly risk danger. I mean, a lot of them have moments in the books where they say something like, even the half-trained children of this age could pose a threat in numbers. So they avoid it, because let's face it, at the end of the day, almost all the Forsaken are terrified of dying and are cowards in some form or another. Why can Logain see Weaves if he's been gentled anyway? Alana's like, hope you're worth this, boy. Gee, imagine if she did what Book Alana did, the moment she was within physical range of Rand. Maybe she didn't hear, because why bother? Show Rand's not worth it, he can't do anything by himself, he shows 0 strength in the power, shows 0 brains or wits or any of the things to keep him able to remain one step ahead of so many people in the books, despite them being rather of humble origin. He's more astute and capable than people assume him to be mentally. You know who else is kind of dumb in the show? The old Amelin Seat. She looks at fire, and her best idea to put it out is to dump water on it. You could probably use air to just stop the fire far more efficiently, Okay, so Aes Sedai can't use the one power as a weapon. Throwing someone out of the way like that kind of classifies as a weapon. But hilariously, I'm thinking how I wrote this, not knowing what Moiraine would do in the final episode. So that just makes this complaint seem hilarious in hindsight. But yeah, no, she could have bound Lan in air to restrain him and keep him in place, which would have worked. What exactly is Swan upset about here? I know I said this a minute ago, but what is her plan? None of the character motivations make sense, and they're all being stupid for the sake of drama. Rand, meanwhile, is owned once again and beaten like an old dog, sits around uselessly until someone comes along to save the day. Oh, not that we should be surprised by any of this, but the finale of Season 2 starts off with Luz, Theron, Telamon rather maliciously sealing away Ishamael, and it doesn't hit right. See, the Forsaken were all at Sheogal when Luz and the 100 companions arrived to seal the ball. The act sealed all of the Forsaken as well. The nearer they were to the surface, the weaker the seal, and the more time and age impacted them. It wasn't like some sort of intentional internal imprisonment instead of death that Luz seemingly does here in the show. the tone is very different. The boar they sealed isn't physically at that location, because it isn't a physical location at all. Shale Gould is just where the fabric of reality, if you want to put it that way, is at its thinnest. But the boar exists everywhere and nowhere. It's weird that they brought the intro back for the last episode too, as a small aside. Funny how the ever victorious army notices a giant unnatural dust cloud approaching the city, and they don't even bother closing the gates or doing anything, they just stare at it. Still, I feel like the Children of the Light in the show are somewhat vindicated. The Aes Sedai haven't shown anything in the show world to be in any way beneficial to anyone. You know? What benefit to society do the Aes Sedai give you in the show? None. They don't have schools, they don't have hospitals, they don't even have those in the books either, by the way. They don't help people. We never see them talking to rulers, giving them advice because they cut Caemlyn. Like, the Aes Sedai in the show are just like some sort of tyrannical matriarchy, and if you displease them, they will murder you despite their vows saying they can't use the power to murder you. And also, if we take the book stats into account, like 20% of all Aes Sedai ended up being Dark Friends. Well, they won't have that in the show, I'm almost certain, but the disturbing trend of ignoring any flaws in female characters in the show verse screws with the overall themes of the story. And it's also very demeaning to women in some ways, because they're just saying all women are perfect and can never have any problems. Which, like, at that point, you're not treating women like human beings. You're treating them like, I don't know, like a little baby or a kitten. Where it's like, oh, look at this perfect little kitten. It can't do anything wrong. A bit creepy to me, frankly. But this is also going to make it hilarious when they no doubt replace Elida, not a dark friend, with Liandrin, a dark friend, as the Amyrlin Sea. It is hilariously ironic that we didn't even see them getting the horn. Legitimately, I burst out laughing when Loial just pops around a corner holding it, whilst Ingtar remarks on how it's so important. Indeed, it is the main plot device of the entire second book, what drives half the cast. Is Loial just walking around a corner? Is that his point in the show? Will he just appear as needed whenever they need him to? Can shrug off the cursed dagger without any explanation? Can pop up in the middle of a scene? Key items without any explanation. Very useful, builder. Rand killing Turak in this way just feels rushed. It's like they went, we don't have time for Rand to have a fight scene. Hope you didn't enjoy that sword fight, because get that out of here. Also, if Rand is completely happy to just murder a bunch of people face to face with the power, why didn't he murder everyone holding Egaene when she was literally right in front of him and she is the sole reason he came here? But he just watches her, then he goes over to someone else and says, you're the ones who did this. What? See, in the books, it makes sense because he's there for the horn. He refuses to channel if he can help it, so he fights Turak with a sword. He doesn't come within a few feet of Egaene, but he does know that she's there when he sees her from a good distance away. 11 out of 10 writing. Why even bother having Ingtar's sacrifice when none of his development, foreshadowing, and the like came through in this season? Because they spent no time on it. They basically cut out everything Ingtar does in the books, apart from die, which they kept. But that robs his death of any meaning, because it's the events that lead up to that which give it meaning. Instead, though, they're opting to have scenes with the characters who are, again, purely by coincidence, acted by people in relations with the showrunner. His line about these women know battle or something was stupid. Yeah, Ingtar, they are Aiel. Their father Ismai. Of course they know how to fight. That was the sort of stupid statement that's purely for the audience's benefit. But even then, we already knew that, so what? They keep trying to draw these stupid parallels between the Two Rivers squad and Luz and the Forsaken prior to them becoming Forsaken. Doesn't make any sense. Mostly in the sense that even ignoring the books, purely from the show angle, they've spent virtually no time developing these characters with each other. Once again, Rand's relationship with Mat and Perrin is very strained throughout much of the Great Hunt, or at least the first quarter of it, or half of it, to the point where you might even believe some of what the show is going for, and the books did not. But in the show, they don't interact with each other for more than a few seconds. There's nothing about it, they just look at each other and say words, so any falling out makes no sense. It is a case of them telling us things happened, but they really didn't. Like in season 1, where they acted like Rand was upset over knowing Tam's not his father. When he poker faced it for the entire season without any hints of that, then they had a 3-second scene where he sulked about it after the fact. Oh, and they never brought that up again either, by the way, they forgot about it. Meanwhile, though, hey look, Mat actually used his brain. Sort of. If you assume that not touching the dagger but still using it is okay. It's nice to see some of his, quarter stafferizing coming into play. Would have needed a really good excuse for how Egaene was able to collar Rhaena. They spent how long in an earlier episode dedicated to demonstrating to us that Egaene and other collared cannot use something against their sword arm that is considered a weapon. And, well, they didn't, did they? No excuse, I mean. She could just use it as a weapon because the writers sort of forgot that they spent an entire episode saying that she can't do that. Physically, it's impossible. They ignore their own established rules because they weren't convenient in that moment. Instead of Egaene being saved by, Nynaeve and everyone, she saves herself because Egaene is stronger than the dragon. She is stronger than the Dark One. Egaene herself is the Wheel of Time. Also, Egaene's flat out murdering Rhaena here. Very heroic, that, isn't it? I bet they thought it was so badass. They were everyone's going to be talking on Twitter about how that bit was so badass. Yeah, no one cares. Perrin killing Jeffrem, pretty weird, because a big part of the reason his son was so enraged at Perrin, or rather, the interesting part about it is that his anger and rage were all misplaced, based on secondhand information that was not correct. But now, he has no excuse. Perrin straight up murdered his father, and his son has every right to want vengeance, because it was entirely uncalled for. In the books, it makes a lot more sense. They're trying to basically kidnap Perrin, and the wolves are there, and they kill a wolf, and he goes enraged. In the show, it's a lot harder to justify it from Perrin's perspective because he's attacked by someone who's then attacked by the dog. Jeffrem sees the dog attacking Volda and he kills it, and then Perrin just surprise kills him in return. They kept Mat tooting, which genuinely surprised me, as I was sure that Egaene would manage to do that as well. I saw Arthur Hawkwing, Amareysu, and even Uno, but I'm not sure if he really deserves to be there in the grand scheme of things, because, don't get me wrong, I like Uno, but, I hate that he was killed, but wasn't the Horn supposed to summon heroes who were, very famous, like they were legends of their ages, or whatever? Uno is just a dude. I don't think anyone made stories and legends about Uno. Do you think they'll actually use the lady playing Birgitte here? Or do you think they'll recast and just say that was a different form of her? Because they could do that and it wouldn't really be a problem. I'm just curious if this, if they've signed this lady for future episodes, because Birgitte will be in it quite a lot. It's also funny how this army, the Heroes of the Horn, and there's 5 of them. Probably one of the only moments from the books they bothered to include and not completely butcher. Well, they did have the Mr. I'm not a hero more or less say, I am a hero. And if that's not showing how damn opposite everything is. Meanwhile, Nynaeve is showing that she's as smart as a 4-year-old. She pushes the entire bolt through Elayne's thigh. No shit, that's gonna hurt, you absolute buffoon. You pushed the fletching through her leg. Have you ever heard of snapping that part off? I cringed so hard at that. Real talk? She should have just left the bolt in if she wasn't even going to bother bandaging it up after pushing the bolt through. I'm no doctor, I'm no field medic, but just ramming the entire bolt and fletching through, then picking her up, making her walk, seems like a worse option than just leaving it in, trying to get her to waddle through the pain. See, generally, if you have a big hole in your body, you should try and wrap it with like a bandage or something, not just walk around with a hole in you. Oh, so close. So close, writers. You almost had a great line from the books. They just missed out the part that seals the deal. Come, it is time to die. It seems they skipped Ishi's spear, inflicting the never-healing wound, and jumped straight to the dagger version he receives much later, which is an interesting choice. I don't hate it, but it might have problems down the road. Egaene being able to fend off Ishi is hilarious. They keep screwing with the power levels in the show to make people stronger, which has the same old problem. If everyone is as strong or stronger or almost as strong as Rand, he doesn't need to exist. Him just walking up and jabbing Ishamael looked so stupid. Why did he just let him? Why didn't he, like, shrug it off with the true power? Did he just want to die? If he wanted to die, why didn't he just jump off a cliff or something? What happened to the battle in the sky? Too hard to even attempt doing that, is it? They interpreted it as, well, they just fought on a tower that was high up. LMAO, that's close enough. Yeah, totally. Moiraine just makes a dragon for him as she knows what those are, somehow. I imagine if we ever do get to the Stone of Tyr, she'll be the one who pulls out Calendar for him, proclaims who he is. You know, he won't be like, stop, I'm Rand al'Thor, the Dragon Reborn. Moiraine will be like, stop, he is Rand al'Thor, the Dragon Reborn. My bitch. To make it even better, we then have Aviendha popping up going, ah yes, there's the Kara Khan, the Chief of Chiefs. Remember that they don't follow the Dragon Reborn. Wetlander prophecies mean Jack Diddley to the Aiel. Ishamael is barely able to overpower Egwene. He doesn't have the true power, even though he's like the one character who the true power should be associated with. Then Moiraine breaks the Aes Sedai oath, which is physically impossible to do, by using the one power as a weapon to snipe people. You literally can't, because she has an oath not to use it as a weapon, other than in the last extreme defense of her life or her warders. Neither were in danger, and she just, like, sniped them. I'm dying. Still, as if that wasn't dumb enough, we then had to ruin Moghedien within seconds of introducing her. Moghedien, who is the weakest of the Forsaken, her strength in the one power is 4, Lanfear is 1. To put it in clearer terms, Lanfear is the strongest female Forsaken, Moghedien is the weakest. Beyond any level of raw power, however, Moghedien almost always avoids confrontation. You know, she very rarely puts herself in any danger where she might need to fight. Almost any of the other Forsaken would have made more sense for this scene, and you would have needed like Demandred or Samael if you wanted Lanfear being shielded. You know, maybe Semirhage, but any of those three in particular, I could see, you know, squaring up with Lanfear and telling her how it's going to be. Whatever, it's done, it's over, I'm free. Free for another year or two before season 3. Lightsabers. Light save us all. The same way Lanfear, a dark friend, a Forsaken, beseeches the light to protect Rand. Oh my goodness.